Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube. I'm here to continue my read-along review of Benight and Beguile, written by John Philip Betancourt. Book 5, Chapter 6, A Second Chance for Mary. In the village, a late afternoon sun warmed the frosty tree tops and fallen leaves on the wet cobblestone streets at Gregory's apartment above the constable's office. Aurora was slowly waking up from a deep sleep, a sleep that was brought on by medication that was injected into her by Gregory while he induced her labor. She gave birth to the child, and now poor Aurora believed the child she unwillingly became pregnant with by Caspian Cassador had not survived. A lie, a scheme cooked up by Gregory and the Shia that Aurora believed. Gregory, Aurora's voice called in a hushed voice. Gregory, Gregory slowly opened the bedroom door and saw Aurora sitting up in bed, her face swollen from crying in her sleep. Are you all right? Can I get you something? He asked, dotting on her every need. Just water, she answered. Gregory obliged and quickly went over to a table that had a jug of fresh water that had been placed there only moments before Aurora woke up. He brought her a drink in an orb like glass that Aurora quickly consumed. She had been asleep for hours, almost a full day, in her medicated sleep. How do you feel? Are you in any pain? Gregory asked, sitting on the bedside. She shook her head no. Are you hungry? He asked. She shook her head no. What can I do for you? He asked again. Tell me about her. Tell me about my baby. What she looked like. What she sounded like. How big was she? Aurora said in a tearful voice. Aurora, please, we shouldn't go through this. I don't want to upset you, Gregory said, not wanting to rehash anything of the labor, and for sure not wanting to add more lies to his already devious one. I just have to know. She was a part of me too, no matter who her father was, Aurora said, sipping more water. She was very angelic, sweet. She did not cry, or she was born already gone. Gregory said more lies. The lies cut at his heart. It was killing him that he had to do this. But this was the only way he thought of freeing Aurora and any ties to Caspian, and thus freeing himself to be with Aurora without the terrible shadow of being a possible stepfather to a child that was created by a serpent of a man, the devil himself. I wonder, because Gregory's very religious, he's a religious figure. I wonder if he feels the child would have had said satanic ties and because of Caspian. Um, that's sort of why I'm wondering why he did what he did. Um, no crying, Aurora said. I thought for some reason I have memory of crying, a baby's cry, Aurora mentioned. Are you sure she didn't cry? Trevor gulped. He thought that the medication would not only render her unconscious, but also memoryless. Perhaps she could have heard something. Perhaps she could have been, could have seen something. More lies. No, never, not one tear. Now you lay back in bed and I'll get you something to eat, okay? I've taken the week off and I'll be here with you for all of it. He added, reaching for a slice of her long honey toned hair, placing it behind her ear. He kissed her cheek, and she did as he said and laid back in bed. Gregory, wait, Aurora said. Evie and Nick, they must be worried sick of me. I haven't really kept in touch since I came here to stay for a few days. Would you please let them know I'm okay and what's happened? I think I can't tell them myself just yet. It's too fresh for me, but I don't want them to find out later. Gregory smiled. Of course, I'll be sure to let them know right away. She smiled at him, and she so quickly fell in love with a man she saw was truthful, honorable, kind, and attentive, and he was lying to her face the whole time. Gregory went into the kitchen to make her a quick meal before he would head down into the constable's office to use the telephone to phone Terramore and fill in Evie and Nicholas about their mother and the baby's stillbirth. All Gregory could do now was keep up appearances and pray that a she would do the same. The sun had fallen now just beyond the horizon over the hills of Welshport Island. Its shadow loomed there in a deep purple sky, casting a gloom of dust to flow over the narrow strait that separated Welshport from Good Island, where tragedy had occurred in the stillbirth of Philip and Mary's baby after a fight in the house between Mary and Jacqueline. In a quiet thicket of trees, minutes from the cabin, where fog lightly rolled over the snowy ground, Philip and Mary stood cloaked in thick wool, standing over a small family graveyard. There, the gravestones of Mary's mother Eliza and father Caleb were joined now by baby girl Mary lost, the baby girl Mary lost in the morning. That morning, the parents had named Louise. I'll never know her laugh or the color of her eyes, Mary whispered. In your heart, find her there in your heart, Philip said, holding Mary close. This is all my fault. If I just figure out how to destroy Caspian without having Sebastian search for the Sisters of Highgrove, I would have never lost Louise, Mary added. You can't do that to yourself, Mary. You didn't know what was to come. You didn't know Jacqueline would do what she did. How could you? You could. How could any of us know? Philip explained. It's my fault. It's all my fault. Mary, stop, please. I'm telling you, it's not. It will never be your fault. It's Jacqueline's fault. She's the one who attacked you in this way and had no regard for our child, Sebastian, too. He could have been more careful and trust us more than trust some woman he's suddenly fallen in love with, especially you. You're his family. Mary shook her head. She would not accept Philip's attempt to shift blame away from her. She knew that she too was responsible for the way things had gone with Jacqueline and how perhaps their own dishonesty with the way Gabriel lost his hearing could have been handled better. Is this punishment for what we did to Gabriel? Mary wondered out loud. Mary, you didn't do that on purpose. Either Jacqueline should have told you what she had planned. You have to understand this. The way things were handled that way because Sebastian is a loose cannon. It wouldn't have been we couldn't have been honest with him. He would have done what he did when he finally found out, or worse, explode, kill, hurt. We're lucky he didn't kill us, Philip said, as they both shivered in the cold in the mini graveyard. Mary refused to blame Sebastian. I understand his grief. His anger toward us isn't for nothing. Listen, Philip said, grabbing hold of Mary's gloved hands. We did what we thought was right. At that time, we discovered the spell had rendered Gabriel deaf. We're buying time to see if we could fix it, reverse it. You know this. Knew this, and she chose to tell Sebastian the truth, to benefit herself and herself alone. That is what happened, Mary. This is the truth. We've lost our baby girl because Jacqueline and Sebastian are two people who cannot be trusted with their emotions, create chaos and horror wherever they go because of it. Our baby girl is proof of that. We have to forgive him. Sebastian didn't want to be this way, Mary reminded. But what has he done to fix it? He could leave, he could go away forever and leave us all in peace, Philip shot back. Mary shook her head. That's never going to happen, not with Evie and Gabriel here for him to see. He loves them. He could open his windows in the day and could end it all. Let the sun in, Philip said cryptically. Mary's eyes narrowed. She wanted nothing more to do with anyone's death. She reached down on the cold, hard ground. Philip labored so difficultly to make a tiny grave suitable for his baby girl, for a small bundle of evergreen branches and leaves that had created into a beautiful winter banquet. A flash of that traumatizing sight of the man she loved sobbing while he dug the small grave, while she cried silent tears, holding a small coffin they had quickly fashioned for the baby. The mourning mother lay the winter banquet of an unmarked grave and crossed herself. They both did a silent prayer, and Mary then kissed her hand and touched her mother and father's gravestones. Watch over our baby, Mama and Papa, she said. The two cuddled together. Philip lifted his large coat and placed it over Mary's shoulders as they huddled together to walk back the cabin as the sun slipped away and the sky went black. Under a starry winter sky and twinkled above gray night clouds, Sebastian watched as his cousin and Philip walked back in tears to their home. He slowly made his way to the grave. He too, with tears in his eyes, he fell to his knees on the grave of his Aunt Eliza, the woman who had turned him into the monster of the night. He was now and cried. He was angry at her. He was resentful for that only way she knew how to bring him back to life after his original death 2 years ago was to use human blood and the spell of the blood of the undead and made him the vampire he was, forever locking him in the purgatory of two worlds. He was angry that he was now tied to Jacqueline and her responsibility of innocent Louise still at birth. He was angry that his son was rendered without hearing because of a spell he asked for went wrong. He was angry that he and Evie were apart. He was angry. His anger turned to sorrow, and he fell from his kneeling position and laid on the graves, crying into the snowy ground. His face felt the icy touch of the snow that didn't melt because of his own cold body temperature. After the tears, he got up and dusted the snow off his clothes. I'm sorry for what has happened, he whispered, and what will happen soon. Then he vanished back into the shadows of the night to feed. Hours later, Sebastian made his way back to Welshport Island and to the ruins of what was his family's small cabin known as Lockwood Thicket, once owned by Rebecca Lord's family. The Lockwoods, after a year ago, the cabin had burned down when Alice Winterbourne and Sebastian fought in a terrible battle that killed her and almost killed Nicky, Evie, and Matthew. It was in this fire that Evie believed she saw Sebastian's body burn too, but he survived. at the cabin that was slowly being put back together by Sebastian. Jacqueline was doing her best to make do with what area she could also revert back to normal using her magic. Her powers had reverted the burned out bedroom back to normal state for her and Sebastian. A front room, too, was also magically restored to what it once was. But the rest of the house had much work to be done. Jacqueline's powers were strong, but to rebuild the way she had done for the first two rooms exhausted her to no end. She waited for Sebastian to return, comfy in the new bed in the cabin as a little fire in the new chimney burned brightly. Sebastian entered the room through a hallway in the new room. The glow of yellow light shined in his eyes as he saw the beautiful Jacqueline Gray in bed waiting for him. Her eyes shined in excitement as he walked in. He was still broken-hearted over Mary's baby. "I missed you," she said in a soft voice. He did not reply, attempted to warm his body by the fire, tossing his coat and gloves off over a chair. "Where were you?" she asked. "I went to see Mary," he replied. She gulped and sat up in bed, wondering what Mary told him. "Mary, she lost her child. I was there. I don't know why I was there. They had a little funeral for her," Sebastian replied, not realizing the conversation Philip and Mary had concerned Jacqueline's involvement in the baby's accidental stillbirth. "Why didn't you tell me you were going there?" "I would have gone with you," Jacqueline said, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I don't think that would have been a good idea, do you?" Jacqueline stammered, unsure of what he meant at first, but then he clarified. "Mary and Philip aren't exactly happy right now with you after my outburst on what you told me. Now they're mourning their child. I wouldn't have wanted them to begin fighting with us again." "Why did you go there in the first place?" she asked as he turned from the fire to face her. "I honestly don't know. I was just drawn there. I went following some kind of feeling, and to be honest, I thought it was just some kind of feeling for me to feed. I needed to feed. Good Island was where I've been finding most of the blood meals after all these years, but when I got there, I went toward the cabins, and there they were, at the little cemetery in the back," he explained. "You didn't speak to them?" Jacqueline wondered. Sebastian shook his head no, to her relief. She patted the empty side of the bed to her next to her, and he went over like a lost puppy and sat down. She helped him and squeezed his body tight in a hug that felt like it would last forever. They slowly turned their faces and their noses rubbed as they did, and their lips came closer and closer together. Hers were warm and pink, and his were cold to the touch, but would absorb her warmth as soon as they kissed. She could feel her breast, her heart beat. It was like a vibration in the air, like sonar. He cupped her hand in his big hands and held her safely as she began to unbutton his shirt. While they kissed and her warm hands felt his chest, his mind was elsewhere, on the little girl that died, on his little boy that lost his hearing, and how he couldn't control his anger when things went sour in his world. He wanted so much to be able to not grow into this wildfire of a person that would ravage everyone in his life if they were trees in a forest engulfed by the fire of his fury. She kissed him deeper now that his shirt was off and reached for her top of his trousers. His eyes filled with tears, and he whispered the name Evie. She stopped kissing and pulled away. "What?" she said. knowing full well what he said. I'm sorry, said his eyes now streaming tears. If I ask you something, will you tell me the truth? She asked. Trash knew she was going to ask after the name came from his whispering lips. Sebastian, she said, waiting for his reply. I don't want to hurt your feelings, Jacqueline, so please careful what you ask, he warned. He stood up and grabbed his shirt, and he had been taken off by her, and slipped it on, but did not button. The glowing light of the fire made his body seem to glow with little speckles of sweet sweat that had beaded on his body. She scooted over from the side of the bed and looped her legs over and let him fall into a swooping heap of sheets and her nightgown that tangled together to the floor. I need to know what I'm doing here. I need to know why you have me around, she said. Jacqueline, things are complicated right now. You know this. You've seen what's happened in the last few weeks. Whatever I saw now may put more stress on the subject. I don't want that. I just want us to, I don't know. I want things to go back to the way they were before, when Gabriel was okay, when Mary was pregnant, when we were at the cabin with them, but I can't. We can't go back to much has happened, and now we've got to try to move forward without them, he said. Together, she said, hoping for confirmation, but Sebastian hesitated. I hope, he said. Jacqueline got up from the bed and walked over to Sebastian, who was clearly conflicted. She knew that his outbursts were key to the animosity between he and his family, especially with Philip, who didn't trust Sebastian as far as he could throw him. But they were two men whose blood were intertwined, literally thanks to Eliza's spell of the undead, where she used Philip's blood to bring Sebastian back. This connection was a source of great tension between the two men. Sebastian resented being turned into what he was, and Philip resented being used to make Sebastian what he was, neither of them realizing their anger and resentments were perhaps mistargeted. Jacqueline put her hands over Sebastian's shirt and let them slide over his shoulders. She could feel his cool skin slide smoothly under her arms. She pulled him close to her and looked him in his pale blue eyes. There is nothing I wouldn't do to make sure we both get what we want, Sebastian. Whatever it is, there's no cost to me, she said. He stared at her for a split second and almost felt the sensation of distrust enter his heart. He knew she had befriended Eve, and he wasn't sure why. Distrust, doubt, and perhaps fear of Jacqueline began to seep through his whole body. But she was all he had now. They were the only two in their own dark world that could understand what they were, who they were, and where they came from. He bowed his head and kissed her again, his mind once more swore with feelings of the nostalgia for his lost life and for Evie. He again, he again, this time only in his mind, thought of Evie. Her name entered his mind like a ship entering a bay, and circled and circled. Evie, Evie, Evie. There were These were silent in his mind, but the witch Jacqueline sensed it all, and she was furious that he was still this much in love with Evie Jordan Lord. As the night progressed in her own bed, Evie tossed and turned. Her bed looked like it had survived a tornado, with sheets and blankets tangled around her like wool and silk, nooses holding her tightly in bed. She slept with her own name coming and going in her mind as if someone was calling to her from beyond the grave or from another world. trying to reach her, trying to tell her something that she could not understand. Whose voice was it, and where was it coming from? It was Sebastian's distorted voice in Evie's mind, echoing telepathically from Lockwood Thicket, but Evie did not recognize it. His voice was the way presented in her mind. It was deeper, menacing too, frightening her in her sleep. And then, as they kissed, Jacqueline's eyes snapped open, glowing white, as she began to control Sebastian's thoughts that were filling Evie's mind. Evie tossed and turned, but in a snap she sat up straight up, and her eyes were glowing too, same color as Jacqueline's. Evie pulled the remaining sheets off of her warm body, and like a zombie, she slowly walked in her dark room toward the French windows that were slightly frozen shut from the frost of the night. She pulled on the iron door latch that was stuck, causing quite the noise in the next room that was in the adjoining sitting room where Jacob had come to get a glass of brandy before bed. The noise of Evie attempting to unlatch the frozen door alarmed him, and he began to make his way to Evie's room. By the time Jacob entered the room, Evie had been able to open the French doors of her third floor bedroom balcony and was standing barefoot on the stone ledge on the frozen cold. She lifted one foot and was about to jump to her death when Jacob dropped his brandy and ran toward her and grabbed her by the waist, pulling her down onto the snowy balcony floor. The hit her body made on the balcony or jolted Evie awake. She screamed, yanking Jacqueline out of her mind and off of her trance. Just as Sebastian picked Witch up in his arms, he took her to the bed to make love to her. Evie screamed again as Jacob helped her up in the snow. Celeste burst into the room and saw them together. "What's happened?" Celeste asked, grabbing a blanket from the floor and wrapping Evie in it. "She was trying to kill me. He was trying to kill me," she screamed. "What?" Jacob shouted back. "Evangeline, you're out of your mind. I heard loud noises from this room when I came in. You were outside on the balcony, almost jumping to your death." "That's a lie," Evie shouted back, confusing Celeste. "Evie, you were sleepwalking, or I saw it with my own eyes." Jacob replied. Just before Evie could reply that it was Jacob who was lying, she suddenly remembered standing herself on the ledge of the balcony on her own. "No, but I wasn't. No, that can't be," she said as she slumped to the floor, petrified of what she almost did, not knowing Jacqueline had controlled her and almost killed her. There, Celeste said, sitting down next to her, hold her body to warm it. "You're under a lot of stress, dear. You're not over both Matthew and Sebastian's death." He would turn to Celeste and push her so that she be released. "Sebastian is not dead, and maybe Matthew isn't either." Evie jumped to her feet. "Evie, calm down," Celeste said. "You know it. Jacob knows it. I don't know it, do I? I don't know what's happening to me. What's happening to me?" she asked, her eyes filled with tears, completely overwhelmed by the stress of reality. "Lie down, Evie. Lie down," Celeste said as she shot Jacob a look, realizing they wouldn't have to do much to convince anyone that she was losing her mind after all. She was finally going to get Jacob was finally going to get what he wanted. Evie's mind was spiraling out of control, but he began to feel pity for her as he watched Celeste attempting to calm her in her bed. The game was to make her seem insane to the rest of the world all over again. It wasn't for her to actually be insane. Back at Lockwood Thicket, Sebastian and Jacqueline's bodies were a tangle of flesh. He was enamored with her, and she was with him. Their heartbeats were sank to their lips on fire. She whispered in his ear that she loved him, and he licked her neck as his eyes' sharp teeth suddenly grew and gently pressed the soft skin behind her ear. She dug her nails in his back, and they made love for the rest of the night as the snow down fell down renewed Lockwood Thicket. In the village 2 days later, Philip Braga carried several boxes of supplies that he was taking back from Wellshort Village to Good Island. He and Mary were alone now. Jacqueline and Sebastian were hiding out in the thick Lockwood Thicket after the devastating loss of baby Louise. As Philip walked toward the boat docks, where he'd take his small sailboat back to Good Island with the supplies, he passed through the card reading parlor of his estranged aunt Fatima, who jumped up from her appointment as her beloved nephew passed her window. Fatima came to the door. He was now too far to speak to her, but she watched as she always did from afar and hoped that one day he'd come and speak to her again. As Philip made his way down the streets, Ashia Hoffman came from around the corner from her street and almost bumped into Philip as she held a child in her arms, all bundled up in blankets and coats. Fatima from her door watched this exchange. Ashia, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Philip said. How are you? Ashia asked nervously, holding Caspian and Aurora's baby boy. I'm well, thanks. Well, actually, that's a lie. We've had something awful happen out on the island, Philip replied, his eyes glued to the baby in Oshia's arms. Mary lost the baby. She gasped, Oh my God, Philip, I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. Has Mary seen a doctor? No, actually, she hasn't. I've tried to get her to, but she says she's fine and really doesn't want to see anyone. At least not now. She is sighing. She could sense Philip's despair and how much he was hoping for a baby to be born happy and healthy. She could feel his heart sink every time he mentioned and how sad Mary was and how stubborn she was being for not seeing a doctor to see if she was okay after the birth. The whole time they chatted, Philip's eyes never left the baby. I'm sorry, who is this cute little guy? He asked. Stupidly, as she hoped the baby wouldn't come up so that she didn't have to lie to even more people. He is, she paused, foster child. His mother died in childbirth, and while we wait to see we can, where he can go, I've been charged with looking after him when I'm not at the hospital, of course, as she has said. You're fostering a baby? That's very kind of you. I'm sure it's not easy with work. Philip answered. It is, yes. Then an idea came to Philip's mind, something out of the blue, something so far fetched that he felt if he didn't ask, he would think about it over and over until his mind exploded. The baby in Ashia's arms lost its mother. For all he knew, he had no father. He had Mary, where a he and Mary were a father and mother who lost their baby. There was no way Philip's attempt to replace the sweet daughter who never had a chance to live, but if it was fate stepping in and showing him that out there in the world there was another child that needed a home, where two parents were also missing a piece of their lives, just maybe, they would fit, and that this was the family that was supposed to join all along. You said you were fostering him. That means he's not permanently going to stay with you, right? She cocked her head, unsure of where he was going with the question. Right, just until we can find him a home where he can stay forever, she said, kissing the baby's little hand. Down the street, Fatima, Philip's tarot card, reading it, walked closer and closer until she got She could hear the conversation, but still not be seen. I think I'm going to sound insane, but if Mary and I, Philip began, trailing of hoping Ashia would understand. Oh, you think you, Philip, would you want to be his adopted parents? She asked. Philip shrugged. He wasn't sure he meant if that Ashia and repeated to him, but perhaps it was. The baby, so tiny and so innocent, needed parents. Ashia clearly seemed to be sure that she couldn't take him in forever. They lost their child so recently and were ready to raise a baby on their own. It could work. Their baby could be theirs and could live with them, and they could love him as their own, just as Gregory wished, out of the eye and control of Caspian, where Aurora could be free of the terrible memory of the boy was conceived, but around a magical witch. No. The idea for she seemed perfect. She was actually fine with the idea of knowing what a good man Philip was, and if he chose Mary to be with him, Mary must be a good person too. A good mother, a good father for an innocent baby. Do it for her, Fatima suddenly said, calling Philip Filho, the Portuguese word for son, as she had turned to see the white-haired Fatima shivering in the cold, staring all of all of them. What are you doing here? He asked his aunt. I think you should do this for this boy, baby, Fatima said, as she took a step back, unsure of what was happening. Philip ignored the aunt he didn't want to speak to, turned back to Ashia. Do you think you'd come to the cabin sometime with the baby? Maybe if Mary meets him, she'll feel okay enough to take him in. Plus, maybe you could examine her. Ashia felt a wave of relief wash over her like nothing she had ever felt. She would be free of the crime she felt she had committed. Taking the baby from Aurora, was this her way out? Washing off her hands of such a terrible lie, too, she had done by helping Gregory. Of course, I can go now if you want, as she said, very eagerly, ready to pass the baby on. Now, if Mary agrees, you can just let us have the baby now. No paperwork, he asked. I can take care of everything for both. If this is something you want to do, I absolutely can, no question about it. The little boy really just needs a good home with people who can take care of him, Bob, better than I can. You and Mary were ready for a child before the tragedy of losing the baby. Now you can. This baby really needs a home, as she has said. Tragedy? Fatima asked. Philip took a breath. My partner lost a child to stillbirth, he replied, filling in his aunt. Fatima put her hands on her heart and gulped. I'll pray for her, she said. We don't need your prayers, Tia. We'll be fine, Philip replied coldly, using the Portuguese word Tia for aunt. Fatima stepped, sensing his animosity was still quite potent. She loved him very much, but had to watch herself, fearing she'd overstep her ground. She was surprised that he even talked to her after all these years. This was their first conversation, he had not shooed her away. The baby in Ashia's arms, Fatima thought, was already a source of good luck. Listen, why don't I go to the cabin, talk to Mary, and then come back for you a little later and bring you over? I think I'd rather speak with her first and not surprise her. It's only been a few days since we lost the baby. Obviously, you can understand. It might be too soon, but maybe not. Mary is very strong. She's a woman like I've never met. She might just agree right then and there, Philip explained. I understand completely. Even if you'd like to be foster the baby first and then speak on adoption, that is fine too, but how can anyone turn down this beautiful face, as she has said? Philip smiled. All right, I'll be back in a few hours, let's say 6 o'clock. Philip replied to Ashia's agreement. I'll be on the dock at 6. Philip walked off into the distance and his dockside boat and sat back on the short trip back to Good Island, leaving Fatima with Ashia. You're his aunt? She asked. Fatima nodded. Well, maybe you're about to get a new nephew, Ashia said, showing the baby's face to Fatima. Fatima smiled back and stepped a little closer to Ashia. She lifted herself up on her tippy toes and pulled the white blanket from the baby's face, allowing the cold air to frost them all. And when she touched the baby's hand, a rush of energy came over Fatima. In her mind, she saw a woman and a man. She saw fire and darkness. She heard screaming and crying. She saw an evil man's face laughing. Fatima quickly released the baby's little hand quickly and tossed down her little fingers that were red at the tips, almost as if she had touched something on fire. Are you okay? She has not seen anything Fatima saw. This baby, who were its parents? Fatima asked, her heart beating fast. I don't know the father, she said again, lying. Mother was here from the mainland, no one local. She didn't make it, she lied again. Are you sure? Fatima asked, her mind telling her something wasn't right about the story. Of course, Fatima wasn't sure she believed the doctor. She saw things she had never seen before. She tried to look at the baby again, but this time as she had pulled away. I have to get back to my house and prepare a bag for the baby. It was very nice to meet you, Miss Braga, Fatima said. Fatima Braga. Miss Braga, of course. Good day, as she said quickly, making her way back back to her house away from Fatima's prying eyes. Fatima stood there on the streets, her thoughts swirling in her mind of what to make of what she saw when she touched the baby. She thought of her own past in Lisbon had ended in scandal. She was forced to come back to Welshport. The scandal of the affair with a Lisbon priest had left her without a family, and now she felt that there was a chance she could finally get back on in good graces with Philip. That was her hopes, at least. But now, with the vision she just had, perhaps that would be her way back. To attempt with him was something in the spirit world telling her or giving her clues to how she could save Philip and his beloved Mary from something dangerous that was coming with the child she was holding. What was the link, Fatima wondered? What did these visions mean for her and her connection to Philip? Fatima knew that something about this baby just felt just as strange and mysterious because of the visions, but how would she use that to her own advantage and help Philip? Then bounding down the street and crush a blue fabric from a dress and slush of what snow show came appointment who had been abandoned in Fatima's parlor to meet Fatima with an angry face as Fatima watched Shia make her own way down the street in a quick pace. The woman from Fatima's parlor shouted in an English Cockney accent, um, I gonna get my money's worth or what? Fatima replied, sort of in a state of daze. I want my reading on the cards, the woman said, her front tooth missing. Fatima did not turn to her client and kept watching Ashia as she finally disappeared into a house down the street. Oh, yes, yes, of course you will. All right, then, come in, the frustrated woman said. Fatima smiled uncomfortably back at the woman and looped her arm onto the woman's and back into the parlor as she dazzled her with compliments on her outfit to calm the woman's anger. All the while, the flashes in Fatima's mind from the baby's touch never left her. Not during the breeding, not the rest of the day. Those visions disturbed her and frightened her, and she would not let those images go from her mind until she figured out what they meant, where they came from, and why she was seeing them. When she touched the baby, she would not let this go, not for a long shot, until she figured out just where the baby came from and who her parents were. The clues were they were burning in Fatima's mind like a wildfire. Nothing would put the fire out except for the truth, and Fatima wanted the truth. So Fatima senses the baby has some sort of supernatural ability or uh, otherworldly presence. So she's wondering who the parents are. Find out if she ever figures that out. Really, really good. Go check out book chapter 6, a second chance for Mary uh, for to be night Beguile. See you guys later.